I sympathize with a grumpy Dutchman. I'm Rich. I own North Rose Coffee, and today I'm going to share one of my favorite foundation stories about the founding of Starbucks. All three original founders of Starbucks were graduate students at Berkeley in San Francisco and frequented a local coffee roaster called Peet's that was owned by a Dutchman named Alfred Peet. So Dutch people are used to darker roasted coffee, at the time, darker roasted coffee, primarily from Sumatra, which was, up until the 1950s, a Dutch colony. So that sort of heavy, earthy, darker roasted coffee is very familiar for Dutch people, but it was a revelation for young university students. And so Alfred Peet's shop became extremely popular, too popular. I sympathize with a grumpy Dutchman, getting upset about things not being exactly how he likes it. So, but these three students, Gordon Bowker, Zev Siegel, and Jerry Baldwin, decided that in Seattle at Pike's Place Market, that they would like to establish sort of a whole bean coffee retail outlet. And so early on in that process, that started in 1971, early on in the process, they bought all their beans from Peet's, from Alfred Peet. And so they would just make the drive to Berkeley, pick up their order, drive back. As it became more popular at Pike's Place, typical, Alfred's like, no, you're too much work for me. You need to start roasting your own. And because he didn't want to be roasting someone else's beans, he liked his own business. So Starbucks started roasting their own coffee. About 1980, so 10 years later, a equipment salesman, Howard Schultz, based in New York, recognized that this company, Starbucks, in Seattle, was selling a disproportionate amount of equipment compared to his other customers. So he decided to go out and visit them and see what they did. At this similar time, one of the partners left the business, Zev Siegel left the business to pursue other interests. And so there were some changes in staffing. They were starting to recognize we've got a tiger by the tail and we need to professionalize. So they hired Howard Schultz, who was a very ambitious salesman and had a very broad view of what the potential of the company was. He made a trip in the early 1980s to Italy and was inspired by not the roasted coffee, but by the drinks that were being prepared. And he envisioned a metamorphosis of Starbucks into serving hot drinks. He convinced the original owners that this was a good idea, and reluctantly they placed a machine at the back of their store in a counter where no one could see it. But despite their best efforts, it became very popular. Schultz wanted to expand and build on this success. They did not. They were whole bean coffee purists and wanted to stay in their lane. Schultz left for a period of time with a bunch of investors and started his own sort of espresso bar chain, Il Giornale. I believe they had one in Vancouver even. One of the original investors was Bill Gates' dad, was an original investor in that. 3-4 years later, Bowker and Baldwin wanted to sell it and sell Starbucks because Peet's was available to purchase. And Peet's was their inspiration for getting the business in the first place. So Schultz convinced the original investors to invest money so that they could buy Starbucks. And then Bowker and Baldwin moved on to Peet's. Ended up that Starbucks bought Peet's a few years later. And then of course in the 90s, Starbucks went public after rolling out first in Vancouver, Chicago, Boston, larger markets. The ground was fertile. In the case of Boston, George Howell had a small, relatively regionally large, but small coffee chain that Starbucks bought, and they plowed their way across North America. Okay, back in the day, people wanted, when I started roasting in '97, people wanted dark roast, West Coast roast, like dark, and they wanted oily coffee. They wanted, not because they loved it, but because it must be good because that's the way Starbucks. And then people would often come in, oh, I need a really big, strong coffee, make it dark, and it's just like, okay, the intensity of the coffee has way more to do with how many scoops did you put in your pot than anything. But the prevailing roast style was extremely dark. We don't follow trends. I like sort of just before second crack is our style. We do some, our dark roast comes out right at second crack, which would be a minute past, our sort of darker mediums. But so we don't swing with, fashion. Right now, the pendulum is swung completely the other way, where people have the impression that an extreme light roast is the pinnacle of coffee roasting skill. And because you're releasing the terroir, which is a term stolen from winemakers. And my experience with coffee is, I've been active for a number of years, is coffee has always been desperate to be viewed as an equal with the wine industry. And it's just not so. Stop it. So the adoption of terroir and all of this has led to this ultra light roast that has become a taste profile. The pendulum will swing back, and who knows where it'll stop or where it'll land. But extreme light roast is not suitable for anyone who likes dairy or dairy alternatives in their coffee. It makes your coffee taste sour. It makes the cream taste sour, like it's gone bad. If you like your coffee black and light, drink it the way you like it. But to me, if you roast by rote, meaning we roast everyone super light, that does not reveal a lot of skill or knowledge about where a bean belongs. That there's an old saying, when you own a hammer, everything's a nail. If you roast everything light, if you're a light roaster, everything that comes in the door gets roasted light, whether it belongs there or not. So Starbucks has begun probably 8-10 years ago roasting blonde. I don't know what blonde, what degree of roast it is. I don't drink Starbucks, but they have, begun to, in the search of revenue, appeal to a broader customer base. So it was very challenging for independent coffee shops, because if you had a good location, good customer base, there was always that underlying fear that Starbucks will open up close by and then, peel off a large percentage of your customers. Not because they were doing anything better, but because branded cups, advertising, herd mentality, they were going to steal your customers. So that was very pervasive for a long time. It took a number of years for the notion of independents are better than Starbucks, for that to take hold and to really be a leverage point where you can say, yeah, you can go to Starbucks and, increase your likelihood of diabetes, or, you can drink good coffee. So it's now essentially the McDonald's of coffee. So it's pervasive, it's everywhere. The drinks are, on the periphery of espresso based. The chain itself was built on the La Marzocco linea, and knowledge of the barista and skill and making drinks by hand. Their machines now are essentially super automatics. It requires very little skill, and they pump out consistently marginal drinks. When a company goes public, it's very difficult for founders or upper level management to really direct, unless there are certain cases where the CEO directs the company. But when you go public, you need to generate more revenue, better returns, and searching for more revenue requires you to invent new drinks that didn't exist, invent new flavors, and do things that you would never have done 20 years ago. So Starbucks is the gateway to coffee for a lot of young people. So because they're accessible. Yeah, it's a lot of branding, pervasive branding, just the brand everywhere. That being said, okay, here's an important point that escapes when we were operating cafes. The expectation that you had a seat, when you got a seat in a cafe, you're like planted. City ordinances say, how many seats do you have? You have to build out infrastructure that services 50 seats. Somehow you and your backpack became 2 people. And so the revenue's cut in half, but the infrastructure costs the same. And customers became used to planting themselves at Chapters or Starbucks, or Starbucks inside Chapters, or whatever the book chains are in the US, and squatting for large periods of time, which became a huge issue for cafes. One thing I point out is Starbucks has the money to build a 5,000 square foot cafe in your downtown, but they don't. They know why, but customers still insist. Like, for instance, we have one in downtown Kingston that has 0 seats. They don't let anyone in. You get your coffee and get out. And it's because they're not there to service the community. It's not the third place anymore, if it ever was, but it's not the third place. There's my admiring take on Starbucks and my rant on Starbucks, my history of Starbucks. Thanks for watching, and hope you enjoyed snippets. Hopefully they edit it well. We'll see you next time.